week I want to talk about Joseph. Now, Joseph is one of the most popular stories in Scripture, and most everybody has heard something about Joseph. Most everybody. Now, there's more than one Joseph. The Joseph that I'm speaking of is out of the Old Testament, out of Genesis. He was the 11th son of Jacob. And Jacob was the son of Isaac, and Isaac was the son of Abraham. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob had 12 sons, and the 11th one is Joseph. Joseph's mother was Rachel, and Joseph was Rachel's firstborn. So you see Jacob had 10 other sons previously to other wives. And then he did have another son, number 12 was by Rachel, and his name was Benjamin. Now, you got to study up on Jacob to get the complete story of what I'm going to share today. But the Scripture says that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his brothers. And he said that, I don't know if Benjamin was born or not, but the indication is, and you know, right off the bat you hear that and you think, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. Well, I don't know if it's fair or not, but it's true. It's a fact. You know, Jacob loved Rachel immediately and wanted her to be his wife. And he worked out a deal with her dad so he could marry her. He worked 7 years so he could marry Rachel. And her daddy tricked him and gave him her older sister Leah in a scheme. And he ended up with a wife that he didn't pick and didn't want. And then he had to work 7 more years for Rachel. My point is, he loved Rachel. And I'm sure he loved his other wives, but Rachel was the love of his life, and he loved the firstborn son of the one that he loved, Joseph. Well, can you guess that this caused jealousy and strife between the rest of the siblings? And some of you been there, haven't you? Been there, done that, lived up in that. And that type of environment breeds hatred, and it can be a difficult thing. Well, fuel on the flames, when Joseph was 17, he had some dreams. Now, those dreams were recorded in Genesis 37. I'm not going to recount them for you, but he had dreams, just in gist, that he saw corn stalks. Now, they didn't call them that, and I'm sure it wasn't corn, but he saw corn stalks in the field, and he had a cornstalk, and his cornstalk stood up and grew bigger than the others, and all the other cornstalks bowed down to his. And then he had another one that said something like he saw the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowing down to him. Well, yeah, that went over really good, because his brothers was like, are you saying that you're going to rule over us? Is that what you're saying? You're going to be greater than us and bigger than us? And man, that was like throwing fuel on the flame. I mean, they already didn't like him. They already were jealous of him. And the hatred just, oh man, it was terrible. What happened? There came a day when it was so bad in their hearts that they conspired to kill him. Now, you know, murder is a serious thing. Most of us haven't contemplated murder. Some of us have. I have. I've contemplated murder. There's been 1 or 2 people I really did want to kill. I mean, you're not here now. I'm not talking about now. This was in my BC, before Christ's life. I mean, one person in particular, I really did. I played out the scenarios in my mind of exactly how I was going to do that. I had it all figured out. Maybe you've been there. You know, Jesus said that really hatred and murder it's the same thing. Now, the physical act carries consequences, you know, in the legal world, physical world, moral world. But inside your heart, hatred and murder, same thing. But see, ultimately that hatred takes over and it manifests itself. And that's That's what happened with these. There came a day when they conspired to kill their little brother. Now, I realize some of you wanted to kill your little brother, but you wasn't serious about it. They were. I just want to point out to you that this is a good example of what happens when someone's not open to the plans or the direction, the revelations of God. Listen, God's got a plan, and when you oppose it or you refuse it or reject it, there's consequences. You see, those dreams that Joseph had were from God, and it was God's intention for him to rise to a place of prominence. That was God's plan. His brothers, for whatever reason, failed to see, realize, and accept that. We have no reason to believe that Joseph boasted or was arrogant about his dreams. We have every reason to believe he was just a young lad who said, "Man, I had a dream last night. Let me tell you about it." And then their hearts were such against him that they received and heard that in hatred. And that caused them to reject the plan of God because it was God's plan. I want to caution you, us. Don't oppose God's plan. Don't reject God's plan. There's consequences. You're going to pay for it, one way or the other. You will. And I'm saying that can't happen by accident. I don't want you to get scared and fear. But when you know that God has revealed something to you and you know His plan, don't refuse that. Accept it, whether you like it or not. Go along with it because it's God's plan. Now, Joseph was on a course of destiny that he was to be used of God for the fulfillment of God's eternal purpose. And so he had this destiny built into him maybe his whole life. But we know at least when he was 17 that God had already established that destiny in Joseph's life. I bet that's true for you too. I have found that God is not a last-minute type of God. Now, I'm a last-minute kind of guy, I do a lot of stuff last minute. And I feel, and this is probably a lie, but I feel that I do better under pressure. I feel that when the crunch is on, somehow or another, I muster up what it takes to get it done. But God's not that way. He's already capable. And He works things out in the long run. And I just guess that He already has a destiny for you, and He's already got a plan, and He knows what it is, and He's ready. He's ready for you to step into that. Maybe you feel that way. Maybe you feel like God's nudging you one way or the other in your life, that you feel like, okay, is there something going on, something more, or is He saying something that has to do with destiny? And understand that we all have a similar destiny, that we're to be transformed into the image of Christ. So that's not exactly what I'm speaking of. I'm speaking more of assignments in this world. A destiny. And I can tell you from experience that I sensed that early in my life, even when I was 8 years old. I remember being a little boy standing on a stump preaching to my friends. But it was downhill from there. At 8 years old, I started lying and stealing and smoking and a lot of other stuff. It was downhill. And I went downhill pretty fast until I was 27. And that's when I crashed and burned. I was 27. I say that to you to point out, even at 27, I began to get some kind of sense of destiny from God again. And there again, it was a long, hard road to see that worked out. So I'm saying this to encourage you. You're encouraged already, right? Now, yippee, give me some of that. Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a little more than that. Joseph had a destiny. But you see, Joseph's destiny was no more important than the other 11 sons. Y'all understand that? That God had selected Joseph for this destiny, but he had every son's destiny in his other hand. There was not one more important than the other. Each one had the same opportunity, and that's something that we need to see, that these 12 sons became the 12 tribes of ancient Israel. They all, each one had their own opportunity to be significant, and that's true of every child of God. He has worked it out so that each one of His children has the same opportunity to be significant. We need to stop looking at one another and comparing our callings or our giftings as if one's more important than the other. None of them are. They're all of our Father, and it is His prerogative to make us the way He wants us to be and give us the assignments He wants us to have. And it is our privilege to accept that and then to be proud of our brothers and sisters who have their assignments, even though they're different than ours. Are y'all hearing me? I'm saying that there's no room for jealousy in the family of God. There's no room for it. There's no room for looking around at everybody else and wanting what they have. There is one superhero in the church, only one. And He's the head of the church, and His name is Jesus, and everybody else is the same. Well, Joseph had this role. You see, they resented Joseph. They resented his function. They became jealous, bitter, became hatred. They conspired to murder him. And there were consequences. I just want to summarize Joseph's life up quickly, if I can, which is probably a total injustice to him. But for those who might not know, instead of killing him, some of the brothers decided to sell him as a slave to a caravan that was heading into Egypt. And then they concocted a story to go tell their dad that he'd been killed by wild animals. And that's what they said. And Jacob, the dad, would grieve his beloved son's death for many, many years, believing he was dead. And the caravan then took Joseph to Egypt, and they sold Joseph to a guy who was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh. And his name was Potiphar. Potiphar. There's another good name for one of your kids, Potiphar. God was with Joseph, and he became successful in the house of this Egyptian there. And Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph and that God caused everything Joseph did to succeed. And so Potiphar made him the overseer over all of his house. He put him in charge of all that he had. Now, for Joseph's sake, God's blessings was on all of Potiphar's possessions. That's another good thought. Spur of the moment thought. I believe that we as Christians, because Christ is with us and is within us, and because we're blessed already, when we align ourselves with others, or we see other people blessed because of us. Sometimes just because you're with people, or because you're for people, or because you're in agreement with people, then you bring blessings because that's who we are. I am convinced that just a Christian's presence makes a difference wherever you are. I'm convinced of that because that's where Christ is. That's where the presence of God is. And that's the way it was for Joseph. He was in this Egyptian's house as a slave, and the Egyptian was blessed for Joseph's sake. Now, another thing about Joseph is he was handsome. He was a really good-looking guy. I can't imagine what he looked like. I'm sure some of you women I can't, but he was an extremely good-looking guy. I see him as maybe muscular and strong and well-built and all those things. And Potiphar's wife took notice of him. She was quite attractive. And she decided that she wanted to sleep with him. Well, Joseph adamantly refused time and again, over and over, day after day. Joseph continually refused her advances towards him, but one day she grabbed him and she attempted to force him, and he jerked loose and he ran out of the house and he left her standing there holding some of his clothes. Well, she was embarrassed. Can you imagine? She was embarrassed and she was rejected. I mean, here's this good-looking hunk of a guy that she's offering herself to, and he'll have none of it. So she's feeling rejected, and now she's embarrassed because there's probably servants that are aware of this, and now here she is kind of caught, what do we say, red-handed. What's she going to do? What does she do? What do y'all think she does? She falsely accuses him. Says he tried to rape me. Well, Potiphar comes home. He believes her lies. He had Joseph put in prison. And so Joseph got to prison, and it was like immediately he found favor with the jailer, and the jailer put him in charge of everything. The jailer put him in charge of the whole prison. Seems to be the story of Joseph's life. He gets put in charge of the whole thing. Well, it started working out well, but sometime later, the story goes that there were two of Pharaoh's top people, the cupbearer and the baker. For some reason, they ticked off Pharaoh, and he had them thrown in prison, and they were put under Joseph's care. So here's the cupbearer, which that's what that means. He's the one who bears the cup. He was the cupbearer for the Pharaoh, and the other was the chief baker. And so they're in prison, and Joseph's taking care of them. He's in charge of the prison, so he cares over these guys. And one morning he comes in to check on them, and they're troubled. And he said, "Hey, what's wrong?" And they said, "Well, we had dreams last night, and we're troubled. We don't know what they mean." And he said, "Well, God's the one who gives interpretations to dreams. Maybe I can help you out." And so they started telling their dreams, and so the cupbearer told his, and Joseph interpreted that. And here's the interpretation. He said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift up your head and restore you to your office of chief cupbearer." Wow, yippee, he's excited. And Joseph says, "There's one thing I want to ask you for this, just one thing." He said, "Remember me when it goes well for you. And if you have a chance, would you mention me to Pharaoh that I'm in here unjustly and that I was stolen out of my homeland and my family back in the Hebrew land? I was stolen and kidnapped, and that I'm in prison. Would you just put in a good word for me with Pharaoh? I'd appreciate that." "Yes, sir, I'll do that." Well, the baker, upon hearing the good news of the cupbearer, told his dream, and Joseph interpreted it, and he said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and remove it from your body. They'll impale you on a tree, and the vultures are going to eat your flesh." 3 days was the Pharaoh's birthday, and they had a big celebration, and both dreams happened exactly the way Joseph said. Exactly. But listen. The cupbearer forgot all about Joseph. Now, I wonder how was Joseph feeling right now. Yeah, I don't know. You know, y'all are learning me. I love the drama in the story that's not written down. Get an idea of this man's mind. He's been hated his whole life by his siblings. He has endured jealousy and strife. He was kidnapped. He's held prisoner. He's been sold. He was falsely accused. He's betrayed. He's forgotten. He's alone. Nobody he knows where he is. Have you ever been there? That's an odd feeling if you've never been there. I've been there a few times when I used to hitchhike. I hitchhiked a lot for a while. It was weird. You'd end up places that didn't have cell phones then, you know. I mean, it was just a couple years ago, but still didn't have cell phone. And I remember being in places where like nobody in the world that I know knows where I'm at. Nobody. That's where Joseph was. Nobody knew where he was. How was he feeling? I mean, his whole life. I was thinking about this and pondering on it and praying about it. I had a thought about it. And it came in the form of a song. Imagine that. And I wish I could sing. But it was a Linda Ronstadt song. It said, I've been cheated, been mistreated. When will I be loved? You reckon that's how Joseph was feeling? I mean, I see Joseph singing that song, you know. I mean, of course, he didn't know Linda Ronstadt. But anyway, what about you? I mean, where are you in your life? What's going on with you? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? How you been treated? Well, 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream, and it was a troubling dream. He called all the magicians, all the wise men in, and he said, hey, I want y'all to tell me what my dream. Nobody could tell him. And then the cupbearer had a moment of clarity, and he said, oh, Pharaoh, I want to admit my offenses. I met a guy in jail back. You remember, Pharaoh, when you put me in prison and all that and blah, blah, blah. And there was this guy in there with a Hebrew, and he interpreted the dreams of me and the baker, and they happened exactly. And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph, and Joseph bring him to the palace or whatever they had there. And Pharaoh told Joseph his dream, and it was two of them. Pharaoh had two of them, and Joseph said, man, your dreams mean the same thing, and the future is fixed by God, and it's going to happen soon. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, crops in abundance, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine, which will consume the land. And he said, I'm going to give you some advice, and I think you ought to select someone who's wise and discerning, and you ought to set them up, and here's how you ought to orchestrate the abundant years, and here's what you can do, and here's how you can do it, and blah, 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 blah. And Pharaoh and all his advisors liked Joseph's suggestion, and the Pharaoh said, is there anybody more wise and discerning in the land than Joseph? What was the answer to that? No. What did Pharaoh do? He put him in charge of everything. And he actually said, Joseph, only because I sit on the throne will I be greater than you. You have full authority over Egypt. Well, that story goes on. Had a big ceremony. Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name. He arranged for an Egyptian wife, and then they had a couple of sons. And Joseph was 30 years old when he went into the service of Pharaoh, which that means it's been about 20 years since he was sold. And he had two sons. The first one he named Manasseh, which means God has made me forget all about my hardship and all of my father's family. The second one, Ephraim, says God has made me fruitful in the land of misfortune. Now, there's sermons in those that I'm not going to talk about. But talk about forgiveness and faith and confidence. It seems that Joseph maintained his faith in the midst of all of this misfortune. Well, the first 7 years wrap up. The famine sets in. The whole world is in the grip of this severe famine, but Joseph was ready. He had stored up grain more than could be counted. They couldn't measure it. People from all around Egypt started coming in and buying food from Egypt. They were the only ones that had food, and everybody from everywhere started coming. And remember that Joseph's brothers are in a nearby country, and the famine is affecting them, and they've long forgotten Joseph, and his dad believes he's dead, but here they are, they're victims of the famine. So Jacob sends his 10 sons to buy food in Egypt. The custom was that everyone who bought grain had to personally go before Joseph for approval. Who do you think they had to go and bow down to get grain? They get there. They do not recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. And I'm going to tell you, it is a hilarious story how he toys with them over the next. You got to read it for yourself. It's in chapter 42 of Genesis. But in chapter 45, he tells them who he is. He can stand it no longer. And he says, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Don't be upset or angry with yourselves any longer because of what you did. You see, God sent me here ahead of you to preserve life. For famine struck this land 2 years ago, and we got 5 more years of famine. God sent me here ahead of you to make sure you and your families survive this terrible ordeal and have a remnant left on earth. So it wasn't really you who sent me here, but God. The same God who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, master of his household, and ruler over everyone in Egypt. And another place, a little later, he says to them, don't be afraid. Am I to judge instead of God? It is not my place. Even though you intended to harm me, God intended it only for good. And through me, he preserved the lives of countless people, as he is still doing today. So don't worry. I'll provide for you myself, for you and your children. Now listen, are you ready for your destiny? I mean, what a destiny. We don't know what God's got planned for you, but it's good. It's good. And to him, it's big. But you see, Joseph had to go through a lot of things to get to the final purpose, where the benefit is. It took a lot to get there, and it may be the same with you. Don't think just because you don't see anything happening today, or it seems like everything's going wrong in your life, don't think that God has forgotten about you or given up on you. He hasn't. His plan is unfolding. Give yourselves to him and be faithful as you know how by the enabling of his Spirit. Hang on to everything he gives you. Endure everything you have to, and let his destiny fulfill your life. Now we hear these Old Testament stories, and we have a tendency to always think, how can we be better people? Are you thinking that right now? Are you feeling that? Oh man, I need to be more like Joseph. Now that's what religion does for us. Legalistic religion, what it says is you need to be a better person. And here's your good example. Why don't you be more like Jesus? I mean Joseph. Yeah, be like Jesus. Be more like Joseph. Well, that's not the gospel. The gospel is that Joseph was a type of Christ. He was a shadow, a foreshadow of Christ, of Jesus himself. So in Joseph we can see how God has loved us and forgiven us and made provision in greater abundance than we could have hoped for. Our salvation is completely dependent on him, just like the nation of Israel was completely dependent upon Joseph. Our faith and our belief in Jesus' finished work keeps us in his protection and his provision. His wisdom exceeds the wisdom of the world in every way. Jesus interprets worldly, earthly things for our benefit and understanding, and his sustenance nourishes us from the famine of sin and destruction. Whatever is meant for evil against us, he uses for eternal purpose and glory. The gospel. Are you listening to the gospel? Jesus has went before us, being cheated, betrayed, lied to, used, abused, shamed, and ridiculed. Like Joseph, he was sold for a few pieces of silver. Like a slave, only to be elevated to the highest position of all, over all, of heaven and earth. And like Jesus, Joseph showed kindness to those who hated him and betrayed him. He extended his hand and his heart with tears to his brothers, to his family. And like Joseph, Jesus brings us close to our Father. So yes, let us be more like Joseph. In that we become more like Jesus. But listen, in Hebrews chapter 2, I'll close with this right here. The scriptures are on your handout. He said when God, Hebrews 2:8, when God placed everything under the Son of Man, Jesus, He didn't leave out anything. And maybe we don't see all that happening yet, but what we do see is Jesus born a little lower than the heavenly messengers or the angels, who is now crowned with glory and honor because He willingly suffered and died. And He did that so that through God's grace He might taste death on behalf of everyone. It only makes sense that God, by whom and for whom everything exists, would choose to bring many of us to His side by using suffering to perfect Jesus, the founder of our faith, the pioneer of our salvation. As I will show you, the writer says, it's important that the one who brings us to God and those who are brought to God become one, since we're all from one Father. This is why Jesus was not ashamed to call us family, saying in the words of the psalmist, I'll speak your name to my brothers and sisters when I praise you in the midst of the community. And in the words of Isaiah, I'm going to wait for the eternal one. And again, look, here I am with the children God's given me. Since we, the children, are all creatures of flesh and blood, Jesus took on flesh and blood so that by dying, He could destroy the one who held power over death, the devil, and to destroy the fear of death that has always held people captive. So notice, His concern here is not for the welfare of heavenly messengers, but the children of Abraham. So Jesus, verse 17, Jesus had to become as human as His sisters and brothers so that when the time came, He could become a merciful and faithful high priest of God, called to reconcile a sinful people. Since He has also been tested by suffering, He can help us when we're being tested. So listen, Jesus has suffered and died for our benefit. And just as Joseph was sold into slavery and thrown in prison, his suffering proved to be beneficial to the salvation of his family. He was the instrument of salvation, deliverance. Having created heaven and earth, Jesus came from heaven to earth to become a human being, subjecting Himself to a human life of submission to human beings, subjecting Himself to human pain of suffering and torture, dying a human death. All for our sake. You see, Joseph suffered those years for his family's sake, for those that he loved. Jesus suffered for our sake. The benefits I outlined for you there, that He might taste death on behalf of everyone. He calls us family. He broke the power of death, and He could really help us when we really needed it. So I'm just wondering today, are you dying in a famine? You know, I know that our country, we prosper materialistically in many different ways, and you know, we're known as one of the greatest countries in the world, and that's true in so many ways. But do you realize that in that kind of society, you can spiritually starve to death and be living in a famine? I'm asking you that. Has the famine affected you? Spiritual famine of your own soul and life. And I'm asking you, are you willing to come to the only one who can help you? I wonder what it took for them brothers, first of all, just to go down to Egypt. I mean, they despised Egypt. And they had to humble themselves to go down there and even talk to somebody in Egypt about getting food. And then little did they know that they had to go and bow before the only one who could help them. I'm asking you that. Are you willing to bow down before the only one that can really help you and let Him nourish you? I'm asking you if you do that. Let's pray. And Father God, we know that in many ways we are in a spiritual famine. We see it all around us. Our culture seems so so despondent, so dark sometimes. And Father, we realize that many of our souls are in a famine for true bread, true sustenance, spiritual relationship, and knowledge of you. So today we're saying that Joseph being our example and type and shadow of Jesus, that we see in him that opportunity that we can come to Jesus and bow down and say, we know you can help us. We want to receive from you food that we need for our souls to be whole and healthy. That you'll stop the hunger, that you'll stop the power of death working against us and around us, the principles of death that work against us to destroy us, and that you reveal to us that you've called us to be family. You call us brothers and sisters and children. And Jesus, we know that you going through all that you have, that you understand where we are and what we need. And so we're coming to someone who knows what we need and knows how to help us. So each one of us, as we're here in this place today, even though we may have very different needs, we all submit ourselves to you, knowing full well that you're the one who brings provision for each of us. So we're asking you now that by your Spirit, that you will speak into, touch, minister to every heart, every soul, even right now, that you'll wipe away the effects of jealousy and